Hi everyone, welcome back to Bear All, your true crime podcast where we talk about chilling true crime cases and crazy true stories. So today we're going to talk about a case that has been mostly around social media. You've probably heard it. It's Who the Fuck Did I Marry? And this is Reesa Teesa's case. If you have not been part of the journey, it's a 50-part series, 8 hours on TikTok. I'll put a link to Reese's profile, or at least the first video or playlist down below. I wanted to talk about another case it reminds me of, which is the Dirty John case. It reminds me of it so much. You might recognise the name Dirty John because it's a Netflix series based off of true life stories. It came out during lockdown, and I was obsessed and also shocked to know that it's actually true. Again, as someone that's worked with a fraud agency, romance crimes, people say, "Oh, like how can she believe this? How can she believe this?" These people are manipulative as heck. Like, I can't even tell you the phone calls I've had at the agency I used to work at, where people get conned out of thousands of pounds of money, hundreds of thousands of pounds. They're convinced that this person that either they've never met or they have met and they're a fraud. They're so convincing. They love bomb you. They make you feel special. And that's why everything seems plausible, because this person loves me. They wouldn't do something to harm me. So the true crime, the Dirty John case, was based off of John Meehan and Deborah Newell. Deborah Newell is a interior designer. She has an established business. She has good money that she's worked hard and earned herself. John was a compulsive liar, always has been, similar to the Reesa Teesa case. He'd been married before he met Deborah, and when his first wife eventually divorced him, she spoke to John's mum. John had always forbidden her to speak to his mother. Don't know why. Don't know the story that was told to John's first wife. But when she contacted John's mum, she basically told her that that's not even his real name. That's not his real birthday. She also found out that he had drug charges against him in California. So at one point, John was a nurse anaesthetist. So anaesthetists are people that give people drugs to knock them out for their operations, basically. Basically, after notice of divorce, Tonya, which is John's first wife, found hidden supplies of anaesthetic drugs that he would definitely have not needed in any way, especially in the home. The police began an investigation into John in the year 2000. By April 2002, John was stripped of his licence to work as an anaesthetist, not only because of drug charges, but he had brought a gun into work. People had seen, they'd notified, the head personnel, spoke to the police. When the police eventually searched his home, that's because of, the gun and the drug issues that had been alerted to them. They found a gun as well as 45 empty containers of 6 different anaesthetic prescriptions. John wouldn't have needed these for any reason. They're anaesthetic prescriptions that, someone would only be taking if they had medical problems. You wouldn't need the 6 different types either. And to find 45 boxes. It's fair to say that John was a heavy drug user. John was sentenced up to 6 years in prison for resisting arrest and for the drug charges. He served only 17 months and then was released in 2004. I don't really know what happened over the next 10 years, but we're skipping ahead to February 2014. Basically, John pleaded guilty to another crime, which was stalking a woman. He met her in hospital. He'd managed to convince her that he was her anaesthetist. She was recovering from brain surgery. They dated for a period of time. Before she became extremely uncomfortable, she had, because of the brain surgery, she had brain injuries. Basically, he was saying that her estranged husband was after her money and it'd be safer with him. She didn't transfer the money. He didn't like that. He got very angry and volatile and left her many, many threatening messages. He also sent intimate photos of her to her family during this time. So John pleaded guilty in February 2014. He was in prison for 8 months. He was out by October the 8th, 2014. Just 2 days later, he meets Deborah Newell. John met interior designer Deborah on an over 50s dating website, and things went very quickly, which is very normal with romance frauds. Like I said, they make you feel amazing, love bombing, all that dangerous stuff that gives people a sense of security in a relationship. He knew what to say, everything was calculated. She did struggle to overlook some of his strange behaviours, but she didn't really see them as initial red flags because everything else was so amazing. So he told her that he was an anaesthetist. He would go everywhere in his scrubs. Everywhere. He was late to a charity dinner and he'd wear his scrubs to the charity dinner rather than say, sorry, I can't make it. And he'd, turn up in his scrubs and be like, oh, sorry, surgery went on for longer, blah, blah, blah. She'd be like, oh, why don't you go change? And he'd be like, oh, well, I'm here now. AKA he had his scrubs, he didn't have any other clothes. His excuse was, I don't have good formal event clothes. All my money gets sent to my children for my children. John didn't have any children that I am aware of. Deborah's daughters were immediately suspicious of this man. Deborah had money. Like I said, she was an interior designer. She built her own company. She was successful. It was good money that she had. Deborah's daughter, I think it was Tara, she was the most suspicious. Really did not like John. And by November, which is, less than a month after meeting John, they moved in together. And apparently by December, when they visited Vegas, somehow John had managed to convince Deborah to get married. So they hadn't even been together 2 full months at this point. So just a bit of background on Deborah. Deborah's sister was shot. So she is dead against guns. Now her sister's son, so her nephew, Shad, in March 2015, so 3 months after they married, 5 months after they met, Shad called Deborah, basically telling his concerns to her. He'd found out that John had served time in prison for drug abuse charges, and was also lying about being an anesthesiologist. Basically, Deborah's daughter, Tara, had spoken to Shad about everything. I was like, I don't like this guy. I have a bad feeling. He's wormy. He's nasty. There's something not right with it. It's moving so quick. And so Shad did some investigating. She dismissed Shad's claims, but Deborah started doing her own investigation. She found out that John had a very long history of conning and seducing women for their money. She also found that he had multiple restraining orders against him. She found this out on a website, I think it was called datingpsychos.com, which has since been taken down. Now, people could post their stories of certain people that they had dated, and obviously some of these were fake, and that would get the people that weren't actually an issue in trouble. So that's why they took the site down. But John had, when you click on his profile, had pages and pages and pages of, this is a picture of John, he did this to my mum, my mum had to go into witness protection, I have a restraining order on this guy, all that kind of thing. So John had 3 standing restraining orders against him, and also 3 others were requested. These were from separate women. Basically, friends, family, whoever can post on this website, and Deborah found out that his nickname in school was Dirty John because he was like gross, always kind of hitting on women and being seedy about it, not nice. And that's where the name Dirty John came from for the Netflix series. Now, I don't know what happened, but apparently John needed to have a back operation. While he was in hospital, Deborah moved out of the house that they were living in, or the apartment they were living in. But being the romance fraudster that he was, they're charming, they know exactly what to say, they're calculated. Within 3 months, he and Deborah were back together. I can't remember the situation that triggered Deborah to eventually finally leave John in June 2015, so we're talking 7 months after they met. But Deborah left John. I know he got volatile and violent, but I can't remember exactly what happened to trigger it. So we are now looking at March 2016. I don't know what happened in between. I would imagine things ebbed and flowed. Don't know eventually what triggered Deborah to break things off with John. But again, they hadn't even been together 2 years at this point. Deborah always had her suspicions when they reconciled that, things weren't quite right. She was always suspicious of him. She became increasingly uncomfortable and nervous around him, and like I said, he became volatile and violent. Probably because he was still using drugs. He was being isolated by John, and she could not stand to be away from her daughters. Her daughters were her absolute life. They were all she had. She loved them. Choice between John and daughters, it was daughters. No, she would not choose anyone over them. By April, Deborah was filing to annul the marriage. John found out and was sending threatening messages to her. She had to go undercover. She had to hide from her husband. Now, Deborah had, at her workplace, because she had her own office building, she had parked her Jaguar there and it went missing. So June 2016, Deborah's Jaguar went missing and was found burnt out, or attempted to be burnt out, not too far away. CCTV had found that it was John that had done this. Now, I'm not sure what happened in terms of John getting arrested there or being found. That was just start of a rampant tirade that he'd go through. It was August 20th, 2016. Tara's younger sister, I don't know her name, basically called her and said, "John's in the area, have you seen? Be really careful." Tara was outside her apartment building. She had just parked up, was about to go inside, went to grab something from the car, and John attacked her with a knife, or tried to. She bit him, managed to kick the knife out of his hand, and she said that she knew if he would get back up again, he would kill her. So she, with the knife, started to stab John. She was panicked, stabbing him repeatedly. 4 days after his fight with Tara, John's sister, which Deborah didn't know he had a sister, pulled the plug to his life support. John succumbed to his injury. Now, I know that the family's doing a lot better, but there's this similar story about Reesa Teesa on TikTok. So I'm going to basically give you a rundown of what happened. I haven't checked for any more updates since I've done this research. About a week ago, there seems to be a lot of updates happening, people coming forward. Basically, Reesa, this woman in TikTok, explained that she met her ex-husband on both Facebook and Hinge. She didn't realise he was the same guy because he had different names. Now, he explained this as a nickname and his actual name, or part of his actual name. We now know his name is Jerome McCoy, and it was Jerome on one and Rome on the other. I don't know where the nickname Legion comes from, but she was basically trying to keep his name out of it so he couldn't sue her. Someone else came forward, and now everyone knows his name. She was calling him Legion, so that's probably what I'm going to call him. So, on the way to their first date, Reese's tyre blew out, and she called him and said, I probably won't be able to make it, my tyre's blown out, I'll call someone. And she's like, I'm really sorry, can we rearrange? She's like, oh no, tell me where you are, like, I'll come change your tyre for you, like, don't be silly. He pulls up, changes the tyre, and she's like, phew, this man, I love this man. You know what I mean? Like, what a man. Wow. So dating was going really well. He said he was something like vice president on the production line of a famous condiment company in Georgia. You know, he had a lot of money. You know, he was doing good. This role was new to him. You know, everything was great. There was nothing wrong with this relationship, and they were dating, and then lockdown hit. And they had to face a decision. They didn't know how long lockdown was going to be, and as we know now, lockdown was like on and off for years. So they decided to move in together because they didn't want to stop dating just because of lockdown. Living together meant they could still date, even though it was intense to live together because they'd only been dating a few months at that point. That was the choice. And he said, oh, like, let me move in with you because you've got a house and like a garden, and I've just got an apartment at the moment because I've only just started this job, and you know, I just needed somewhere to crash while I figure out my living situation. So he moved into Reesa Teesa's 3-bed home with her. He started paying basically the bills for her and stuff, like her mortgage, basically. So she didn't have any reason to believe that her boyfriend couldn't afford things. You know, he was lying because he clearly had a job because he was paying her bills for her. Now, Legion had lied about so many things. He said something like he had 4 brothers and 2 sisters, and he'd often spend time on the phone with them and be like, oh, yeah, how you doing? Oh, yeah, babe, like, he's asking how you are. And, like, she'd call out and be like, yeah, I'm fine. Like, he'd have phone calls like this, but he wasn't talking to anyone. So Legion basically was like, oh, babe, I get a company car, like, I'm getting a new car. Should we get you a car? I'll get you a car. Like, you're my babe. Like, of course I'll buy you a car. Car's never materialised. He said that his car, he didn't want to drive it to the area of town that she lived in because, you know, it was dangerous. So, he would drive his car to the registered business office, then drive it to work. So, like, he'd drive his car to the registered business office, pick up the work car that he got, drive that to the, like, production offices, and then when he came home, he'd drive from production offices to the work offices, and then to the work offices, he'd bring his own car home. Reese's car never appeared, obviously, because it wasn't real. Neither was Legion's car. But apparently, he'd always been a compulsive liar. They'd also spoke about getting a house, and obviously because it was locked down, things were difficult. Now a lot of people are speculating, you know, why did she believe him? How could she believe so many lies? You know, romance fraudsters, for whatever reason, you know, he obviously wanted someone to take care of him. He wanted someone to basically look after him and a nice place to live. That's clearly the motivation behind this here. Also, it doesn't help that Legion had paper receipts. Like, when you get a mortgage, you need to get approval from the bank that you're going to get the loan for the mortgage. So they will give you, like, something in principle, it's called, where they basically give you a paper or email to say, here, yeah, this person's legit. We've approved that they will get this mortgage for this house. That's absolutely fine. Then you can show it to the sellers to say, like, oh, right, okay, this person's legit. They've got the money to buy the house. Cool. He had all that kind of stuff. Mortgage in principle, that's what it's called. It's basically to say that it's been approved that you can afford the house that you're going for so that you don't waste people's time. I can't remember exactly when they got married, but like she was saying, she signed the marriage certificate, and she did have some suspicions, and she looked at the social security number, because you have to, when you get married, you have to confirm that all the details are correct for, like, both of you. I only know because I've only just got married, so, like, you need to make sure that yours and your partner's name is correct, that your dates of birth are correct, your house address is correct, all that jazz. Your social security number, so your national insurance number over here in England, that goes on your wedding certificate, your marriage certificate. Basically, Reesa was leaving her job. She was going for a new job. She needed like security clearance, and so she needed his social security number and him to fill in all these details for whatever job it was in. It was needed. She needed background checks on like him and her. My previous jobs, I've had that. Like when I was working with the fraud company, they need to make sure that you are not dodgy. Your partner you are with are not dodgy. So you put your social security number down, and she realised, wait a second, that does not match the social security number that's on our marriage certificate. What's going on? Because she had originally, when you get your marriage certificate through, you've got details on it, and they basically email you to say, is this correct? So is this information correct? So she took the social security number, searched that one, nothing came back. Fine, cool. The one on the marriage certificate, she did a background check on it. She found that Legion had been married twice before, not once, twice. She knew that he had been married once and that he had a stepdaughter and stepson. He had said all kinds of lies like, my uncle's died in COVID, my nan's died in COVID, which we later found out in updates that the two people he was talking about had died, I think it was 8 to 10 years earlier. He also said that his stepdaughter died in COVID and that can he give £2,000 to the mother towards the funeral because it was his stepdaughter. She also found out that Legion didn't have 4 brothers and 2 sisters. He only had 2 brothers, one of which was a twin. And from this information, she found out on the divorce proceedings, it had the phone number of one of the ex-wives. Reesa called that phone number. She called the ex-wife to be like, hey, what is up? I have alarm bells. Like, help me, please. I wouldn't be calling you otherwise. She was saying, I wasn't calling her to bother you. Like, she was saying what happened, like, that she spoke to her. She was like, I'm really sorry. I'm Legion's wife. Like, I just have a few questions. And apparently the wife turned around and said, well, if you're calling me, it must be bad. Now, she spoke to the ex-wife and found out all the lies that he told. The grandmother and the uncle hadn't died when they said they were. The stepdaughter was perfectly fine, but because she said she didn't want to alarm her and say like, oh, he said your daughter's died. She said something like, oh, like he talks about your children a lot, like, are they okay? She was like, yeah, my children are fine. Like my daughter and son are at school at the moment. Like, finding out without telling her what he said. Now, everything came to a head, obviously. She said she was fuming. At this point, Legion had some kind of injury that meant he couldn't move. He spent a lot of time off work. He spent time in the spare room, just surrounded by Lucozade bottles, she said. And then, because he couldn't get up to go to the toilet, he was urinating in the bottles. Bear in mind, this is her house. The tip of the iceberg, turns out he was also cheating on her with prostitutes and stuff like that. And that was it. She saw red. She was like, you need to get out of my house now. You pack a bag and you leave. She had to call her mum because she was furious. And the mother was like, Legion, you need to leave. She's going to murder you and I won't do anything about it. Like, I can't get there. Now, Legion's first and second wife came forward on TikTok also, verifying things that he said. Legion has done several interviews with TMZ, and he stated that the reason Reesa Teesa came out of this is because she wanted to reconcile, and he didn't want to reconcile with her. Okay. So, not only have you got Reesa Teesa telling her story, you've also got your 2 ex-wives telling their story, but all of it's fake. And also Reesa Teesa said she wouldn't have come out with everything if she hadn't have spoken to Legion's family first, because she found out from Legion's family what was true and what wasn't. that's how she found out he was a twin brother. It was the twin brother that was successful, all that jazz. It's also alleged that Legion suffered greatly with mental health problems, possibly schizophrenia and bipolar, in his 20s, which is about when schizophrenia and bipolar kind of manifest. Legion said it's all defamatory and he's talking about taking legal action against her. But again, Reesa Teesa didn't actually name him in her videos. It was one of the other ex-wives that came forward and was like, haha, Jerome McCoy. So really, Reesa can't really be, held accountable for it because she didn't mention his name. So Reesa got permission to talk about this stuff as well from Legion's family. And then afterwards, they were like, oh, here are some inaccuracies. She also addressed everyone, was like, oh, I spoke to the family, here are the inaccuracies. They were only small things, not anything major, but they all confirmed that Legion had lied about a lot of stuff. Because Legion, when he left, went to go and stay with his family. Ended up couch surfing. The only way Reesa managed to get a divorce from Legion was they went to some kind of centre. She was like, "Oh, meet me here," and basically there was a notary there. They signed it. He didn't want to. She was like, "Well, you're gonna freaking sign it. Sign it." And she said when he turned up, like he was like emaciated. He looked gross. He looked like he'd not washed in weeks. He looked like he was living out of his car. And she felt bad, so she gave him some money so he could get himself some food. This doesn't have a violent end like the John Meehan story does, but it's still that whole major manipulator thing and how dangerous online dating can be. I say that I met my husband online years ago, but in terms of romance fraud and stuff like that, we don't really know what Legion was after. It could be his mental health that affected things. But his family said he's always been a compulsive liar. That could be to do with the schizophrenia and bipolar. But like I said, I will link the Reesa Teesa videos to you down below, or the link to the playlist. Let me know if you want to cover any particular story. Also, if you do investigate, I want to know whether you think the Reesa Teesa story is true or not. To be honest, I think it is. You've got too many people coming forward now and providing. They're like, I've got receipts for this. And Legion, when you look at his interviews, there's something not quite right. He doesn't straight up deny anything. He doesn't try to explain anything. He just blames the women, saying they want their 15 minutes of fame, and doesn't actually talk about specifically what happened and the claims that they make against him. He's clearly some kind of dangerous individual that needs a lot of help. But anyway, that about wraps up this episode. Thanks again for joining me this week in your Beryl True Crime podcast episode, and I will see you all again next week. Just a note to say, if you or anyone you know are affected by romance fraud, there's some charities listed below.